Guys, did you ever think, if you're not historically minded, you probably wonder, like, why is life like this? Like, why do we have suburbs? And then I'm tortured with the idea that we have suburbs because of John Locke. And if you're like, I don't know who John Locke is I'm like, don't go look it up. It's not worth it. We have suburbs because it's the rational outcome of the pursuit of all things rational. And I was having that thought, I was on a train, it wasn't too long ago in New York City, the subway. And then I was like, let's talk to a classical educator about this. And then I was referred to a very good classical educator who runs the Classical Commons, which is basically this really cool sort of house of wisdom that's trying to sort of realize everybody's dream to have an alternative to public education by creating a classical education opportunity for parents who want to find the right place for their kids. So Classical Commons, this is Robert Jackson today. He's going to help me with this idea that, wait, does everything just end with the suburbs and no culture because of John Locke and the Enlightenment? And also, are we sure we want to do classical education? Because isn't that how we got to this postmodern moment? That's today on Heavy Things Lightly, a podcast that tries to get you to love us and our work at First Things. Check out what we do, because it's happening all over the world, and we need your help all the time. And Robert Jackson's helping me to help us by having a great conversation. It's a good conversation. Check it out. If you stay long enough, you'll notice that the sun goes down and I go dark. Guys, this is Robert Jackson. You heard the introduction. He's a classical educator. We're going to get into, I'm going to challenge some classical education presuppositions, but also I want to talk about classical education, which I never had, and living in Africa and stuff. And I want to figure out what classical is. But so, Robert, you guys have a project, and where are you right now? Flagler?
So I am in Phoenix. Been out here now for 12 years. But I do have an association. I think you probably saw that on my signature line. I'm a fellow at the Flagler College, which has an institute for classical education.
You're helping them do what you're helping everybody do around the world. So how would you describe what you're doing?
Be happy to, right? So Classical Commons was born from my experience and the experience of my business partners, having worked with classical K-12 schools. I worked first as a professor of education, training teachers, and doing it in a rather idiosyncratic or eccentric way because we were looking at the tradition, namely looking back 2,500 years or so from the Greeks and seeing a through line to what we do in the classroom today. And that's pretty eccentric in most education circles. But I did that for a dozen years before being recruited by a large charter school organization that was classical, known as Great Arts Academies, and worked as their academic officer as a liaison to higher ed, developing programs, teacher training, working with the curriculum, that kind of thing. And I noticed over those 10 years that there was just such a demand, such a need to find ways to produce more of these schools. So many families were looking for more. And so, as I said, a couple of years ago, we got the idea, a couple of us who had been in this work, we need to prop something up that helps support individual single operator schools that don't have any kind of network. They don't have any support structure. Maybe they're in an association, they're scrabbling, they're putting it together. They're scratching it together.
Yeah.
But in many ways, they just don't have, the experience or the collective wisdom of those who've gone before them, and they are looking for help. So we propped up Classical Commons as a platform designed to aggregate and to network these schools in a common purpose, right? Hence the name. Taking that classical education, putting it into a space digitally, and of course, it always happens in the physical, the flesh and blood, but we wanted to digitally aggregate resources that would help schools find talent, because that's job one. The faculty, it's always about the faculty, the quality of your faculty, your teachers, even your staff, right? It matters.
Yeah.
People you hire. And then right behind that, how do we cultivate that same faculty so that they become not only increasingly capable as teachers, as craftsmen, but also a sense of their professional growth. Like they've got a pathway to move from being a novice, being a journeyman, becoming a master. We really wanted to bring that kind of quality to the work that these individual schools were doing.
So,
I have to just tell you real quickly, we went out back in October, did kind of a survey and said, hey, if you're interested in this, sign up. I think within a month we had 110 schools. And by surveying them as to their needs, we saw this explosion of desire. I mean, they were just clamoring, help us, please help us. And of those 110 or 20 schools, a third of them have opened since 2020. Can you imagine that? Like these are fresh. These are babies, right?
This is like conscientious mom and dad trying to train their kid in a way that's not public education. Then they stumble on something, and then a couple of their friends stumble on it. Then they have something like a school, but they don't really know it yet. And then they find you guys. That's it? What's happening?
That's it. And we just want to
know these
those
parents.
schools. Yep.
I know these parents.
You bet you do.
Yeah, because I was I taught for a long time.
And actually most of us who've gotten involved in it were or are these parents, right? We were homeschooling 20 years ago, 25 years ago now, and kind of came to this, our own experience, right?
I thought I was doing it when I was involved in opening a school in Naples, Florida.
Okay.
And then I realized, no, it's just the staff that thinks we're doing this. The parents don't think we're doing this. The parents think that their kids are going to a 4-year college and getting a good job. By the way, that's all that ever happens. Then you're like, wait a minute. We actually did a school that has its own integrity. In other words, when your kids come here, they actually are learning in order to learn. And then they're like, yeah, that's really cute. Thanks for playing poorly paid teachers. But we prefer that they go to University of Florida and get as much money as possible to do it. And then all hell started to break loose. What do you think about that?
I tell you, we have got an uphill battle. And this is why I say with those young schools, even those more mature schools, they've got to address that parent community. They've got to come up front, out of the gate immediately with an understanding that if you send your kid to this school, you understand that there's a full treatment they're getting involved in. I mean, they're going to get the whole experience. And we say this in classical circles, you're the first educator, the parents, right? The first educators. And so what you do at home, the activities that you populate your days with, the kind of things you read or don't read, the music you listen to, right? Just that whole panoply of things that you are doing in the home, they are educating the child implicitly. So what we do over here in the school, if we're not synced up, if we're not having some conversations, if you're not able to take the content that we deliver in a history classroom, in a literature classroom, in a math classroom, and be able to reinforce that or talk about that with your kids, if you're not involved in some way, shape, or form, it's unlikely that your child is really going to benefit from the liberal arts experience. It's got to be a whole community. Go ahead.
Keep playing along with me, Robert Jackson.
Yeah, please.
Okay. Because I don't think the words you're saying, they're beautiful. We'll get into the philosophy of classical education because I want to hear what your take on what it is. But okay, let's keep going because I had these were profound experiences at this school. It was NAIS, so
okay,
it was it's what it is. It's mostly wealthy parents that just want their kids to run the State Department one day or something like that. So okay, so work with me though because I hear you, and I know that Classical Commons may not be answering all of these questions, but you're a Classical Commons guy who's interfacing with parents about what they should do.
Sure.
So here's the biggest dilemma. I'll play along. I'll be moderately wealthy white person from a classical education background who also, so I'll be this person.
Okay.
Robert, it's fantastic what you're doing, and I'm really behind you. I'd like to know how my kid's going to do on the standardized scores that are essential for them to develop into a really top candidate for Harvard. And so if you're running a school, work with me. Like, I noticed that there's a lot of time where they're doing a lot of interesting things. It doesn't seem to directly address the issue that I'm having, which is, are they being properly prepared, and are they able to compete with such top-line students as I'm describing, who are going to try to get into the finest schools? It doesn't seem that you're really addressing that, Robert. What would you say to such a parent?
I'd have to be gentle. I'd try to be gentle. I'd try to be, I try to have some finesse. But I'd have to remind or draw attention to the fact that those Harvard students that you have sort of set your sights on having your young person join, they've most recently come in for some pretty scathing criticism. A few years ago, they were caught in this cheating scam that was endemic to the university and to the student population. More recently, and I'm talking just in the last couple months, we've had major articles from major publications like the Atlantic or the New York Times saying, hey, these kids aren't reading. They don't really do books. And so I'm thinking to myself, if Harvard is your ambition, you may want to rethink what you're likely to send your student into. Go ahead.
But Robert,
keep the voice. I want the intonation so I know that it's you. Sorry, Robert, I want to make sure I got the persona right here.
This is deeply interested and should we say powerful parent speaking. Let's tell me.
That's right.
Polly, the powerful parent.
Okay.
Polly wants to tell you this, Robert, but I think you're trying to convince me that perhaps I should have different expectations for my child. But you're speaking about education systems at the college level that aren't proven, Robert, and I'd rather not have my kid be a guinea pig. And, we are paying some, it's not nothing to have our kid here at this experiment. Why should I want them to do yet another experiment after their 4 years here in high school, Robert?
Yeah. So I'm wondering if you, Polly, if you really are interested, and I suspect you are, in having your child be successful in the typical measures of, making their way in the world, developing their skills as a professional, basically getting employed and being a contributor to society. And this question of whether your child is going to be a guinea pig, right? By no means are we interested in trying something novel, something kind of.
Well, I see this. This is good, right? I see where you're going.
Moving in the direction of something that's really going to be a fad, that's here today, gone tomorrow, as we say. No, we really are interested in providing your child with the kind of education that is going to be durable. It's going to last. It's going to be, as a phrase has it these days, future-proofed. And I'm actually thinking here of some very specific examples that you and I know, because we know, for example, right, that Steve Jobs was affected most profoundly by his encounter in an art class, a calligraphy class to be specifically. His aesthetic world came to life, and his ability to build and to shape Apple according to his ideas, his vision for something that had never before existed, is absolutely the kind of entrepreneurial spirit that we're trying to produce by liberally educating young people. We could say, go ahead.
I want to make a toast to that.
All right.
Because I actually think that's probably the answer. That doesn't mean it because I think that is of any importance. But I think at that point, probably the powerful parent either has to accept that, which is a really honest answer, or they should just get out of the school already. Like sometimes not everything's for everybody. So I want to make a toast in the tradition of the old world, the Georgian Supra. We do this on the show. It's Bright Week. I am actually having a little sip. People are yelling at me like, John's drunk. I'm not drunk. I'm perfectly, guys, I don't even really like alcohol. But when you drink and you make a toast, you shouldn't play around with the toast in the Georgian tradition. It's like a real thing. And so I didn't prepare you for this, Robert. So you may not have a proper drink.
We'd have to go get a glass. And
no, don't worry about it. I didn't prepare you. But I know you have some sort of tumbler there.
Yep.
You're drinking something. So to maybe defying the marketplace and actually offering something like goodness that might actually in the end transform the marketplace. So something like to your work, Guggy Marcos. Yeah. Cheers to you.
Cheers. To
your victory, the Georgians say. Guggy Marcos.
I was going to say, what? How is that in Georgian? How does that sound? Give that to me, the phrase.
It's Guggy Marcos. There's two of us. So Guggy is to you. Marcos is your victory.
Guggy Marcos.
To your victory, which is a reference to the resurrection. To your victory over death. And so when the Georgians toast, they're toasting to to the resurrection, basically.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah. They're
right here this Easter week, man. That's the place to be.
Yeah, it's Bright Week. So when it comes out, whenever it comes out, it'll be later. But Bright Week goes for 40 days for us. Well, the bright season goes all the way till Pentecost. So
wonderful.
Can I continue with this? We'll lead into whatever you want because this is how we do it on Heavy Things lightly. Here's some more light stuff. Probably the powerful parent is gone. Maybe we'll bring in somebody new, but here's something. Now I'll be one of the classical educators.
Okay.
I'll be one of the guys you're trying to help if I understand classical commons, which I think I do. By the way, it looks like you sort of have a 4-step process. The thing you're trying to build a platform, and you're trying to after you build the platform, you're trying to sort of figure out a way to get people in touch through subscriptions, and you're working on creating sort of access to teachers who understand this, right? And then through that, you're developing this really beautiful awareness of options that are classical, and parents need this, right? Do I have that right?
That's right. Parents need it. The school leaders themselves, because so many of them are relatively new to this work, they need support. And obviously teachers, we just want to make sure that teachers, I started out as a professor and a trainer of teachers. I mean, that's where my heart is at. I want to make sure that these folks flourish in the classroom, that they can find they fulfill their calling.
All right. Help me with this now.
Yeah.
And again, right now you don't run a school. We've interviewed one guy that runs a school. I'm trying to remember he was an excellent guy. I can't remember his name. We've interviewed the Searcy guys, especially Andrew Kern, who's really like the philosophical director of this classical education concept that I know a lot of people love him. But so this may not be fair to you, but I'm going to try anyway, because I know that you have to be able to handle this concept at classical commons. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to operate in America. So here it is. You'll see that I have my communist leanings. I just want to say communist here being communal, not
communal, not Marxist. That's right. That's
destroyers of culture and lives.
Right.
Not a Stalinist people. Okay, so here's the question from the inside. We're at we're not a board meeting. We're at a teachers meeting or something. So what are you guys seeing? Because what I'm seeing is the students I want to hold on to. You know, we're not getting paid much to do this. And I don't really care about the money. The problem is it seems like the marketplace demands that we have an answer to this question of how are we going to afford to do this? Because it's not clear that the payoff for the students is lucrative. And that's why in the history of private education, anyway, let's call it private, the payoff is lucrative. That's one of the reasons that the private school tradition exists in America, is because if you got into private school, what you were creating was a network that ended in a type of feeding tube into the things that were most essential to wealth in society. And I don't know that we're doing that, guys. We're actually sort of like on the edge of that. We're actually not really one of those characters. How do we tell our parents that there's enough value in this? And so what do you say to the inside people who see the marketplace as brutal? What should they do about that? How should they be attractive in a way that hands off?
Yeah, I think it's really important for us to acknowledge that this marketplace of ideas, of alternatives, right, of educational alternatives, of this particular product, and I use that term real loosely, right, but this way of educating the young, if it's entering the marketplace of ideas, it will stand out, as we started with Polly, right, and sort of countering Polly's concern that her kid wasn't just going to be fast track to the Ivies. The fact that she's still thinking a fast track to the Ivies is success is a problem. Like out of the gate, that's a problem.
That's probably true, actually. Right, exactly.
And then if we're talking about this classical, and if I can simply say this liberal arts tradition that's easily got 2,500 years or more behind it, is entering or re-entering. It never left entirely. It never left. In fact, even our best teachers today, no matter where they're at, public or private schools, are drawing upon, right, the fountainhead. They're drawing upon the sources, because you can't do better than going to the great works. You know, Matthew Arnold famously said, this 19th century thinker and educator said, this is the best that's been thought and said, right? And I would even add, it's the best that's been thought, it's been said, it's been produced, because we're really into this notion of poesis. And I'm sure your Orthodox listeners, or those who've just dabbled a little bit in classics and Greek, would recognize this making, this poesis, is at the heart of a classical education. And so the idea that we're going to compete, enter the marketplace, and play by the same rules, which is information transmission, download, standardized test, high performance, check, so I can at some point, launch and pull a 6-figure salary and be partner in some firm in 10 years. That's the objective? Like, that's your definition of success? And again, I'm telling you this frankly.
Of course.
We got to get in and get under and get around that and critique that from the get-go, because the marketplace of education right now is largely driven by what we called a few years ago, college and career ready.
Oh, I mean, lying.
Listen, college can be a beautiful thing if you have a vision like John Henry Newman of what the university has been, like what it was constructed to be, a universe of knowledge. And if, as Newman, writing in the 19th century, articulated his concern that this thing was falling apart. He noted in particular that it seems like the social sciences are kind of jockeying for primacy. The idea of theology, it's moving to the margins. We don't have a queen of the disciplines. So now there's going to be this kind of cage match to see who provides that dominant framing, right? Who tells us how we know the world. And if you think that through philosophically, which I know you want to, then you know that our epistemic kind of foundations today are primarily in some brand of empirical science, right? Empirical methodology, I should say.
Yeah.
Mixed with, in a weird way, this kind of postmodern free-for-all, critical theoretical stuff that just says, I can spin it any way I want.
That's right.
These two epistemologies seem to be, in a sense, contradictory, right? Oh, you have bedrock foundation if you've got empirical method at work, or you don't say anything that you can say anything with. It's always just words about words, layer upon layer. Listen, there's objective reality out there that we subjectively are attempting to understand individually and collectively. And so philosophically, a classical approach says, we're going to draw upon a tradition. We're going to listen to a chorus of voices. We're going to be involved in a great conversation. These are all metaphors, right, that have come up in this renewal of classical, because we're trying to get our bearings. We're trying to make sense of the world. And college might be a part of your future, but it is not the most important thing. In fact, it's probably third or fourth or fifth on the list, right?
Art of Tamada. It's when you learn how to be a tamada. This is the Georgian tradition of toasting. October 23, 24, 25, 26 in Greenville. Tables, live music, speakers, cooking lessons. That's the October event. It's a fundraiser. Come, learn everything about Georgian hospitality and the First Things Foundation take on it. Or November 6, 7, 8, 9. That's our Florida Intimate event. That's where we got folks like Neil DeGrade coming down and playing music. We got guests coming. I want you to tell you all about them, but that's 6, 7, 8, 9 in November. Art of Hamada, First Things Foundation. This is our trademark. This is what we do to raise money. Come with us. Peace. All right. This is awesome, but okay, now
Push back. Come on, John.
let's get
Give it to me.
philosophical. Let's get philosophical. We'll
Hey.
leave the parents and the educators alone. So there's an objective reality. I'll go with that. And the objective reality is being reflected in something like a journey called education. So you're with me so far. That's good.
Yeah. And I don't say that we apprehend or are able to grasp it entire, right? Reality out
But
there.
it did seem like a root or a foundational presupposition of what you were just describing.
It is. I'm just saying that our knowledge thereof, right, is always ever limited, right? We're always
You don't have to claim to know the objective reality like perfectly. Otherwise, you would be the objective reality.
Yeah, that's right.
So,
I'm not there. I'm not that, right?
So, but the presupposition is there is one.
Yep.
Education should draw from it or hover over it or be adjacent. It should attempt to be that, or at least
midwifing, right? That's a very a favored metaphor, right? Midwifing, bringing such knowledge of reality
Beautiful.
into existence for the individual, for us. Yeah.
right. It should be the hose from which we get our drink. And so,
Yeah. There you go.
no worries. Midwifing, love it. So now here's where it gets a little tricky.
Okay.
For me, Rockefeller and big business captures education in the late 1800s, or really earlier. It starts to be captured, and they understand education as simply a practical activity by which to prepare human beings to feed themselves in a modern world. And so for them, the foundation is, at that point, the foundation is what let's call it utilitarianism, some hyper rationalism, or they're drawing too. And what they're trying to say is something like, for people to be successful, they need to be able to feed themselves in a world that is no longer about gardens and fields. And so there's a paradigm shift. I would call it devilish. But let's keep going back, because one of the problems I've come up with as an educator is that, oh, wait a minute. Because the objective reality that you're describing, I would argue, especially as a kind of old world Orthodox guy, is a classical liberal understanding of that objective reality. And so here's my question. The classical liberal, the guys that we look to for that classical liberal worldview, John Locke, those 18th century writers of philosophy, Adam Smith, these guys.
Yeah.
They have a really bad understanding of objective reality. Like, it's garbage. And I know that here's where I get in trouble with my friends like Andrew Kern and maybe you, Robert, is they are the precursors for the relativism that we all decry. Like, those cats ushered in the world that you're trying to fix. And so when we return to them as classical educators, I get like kind of sick to my stomach. I get really nervous about that. And now I hope you'll make a Catholic argument that, no, John, that's not what we're doing. We're going further back. But then I got another question. But go ahead. Like, what do you think?
There's no question that we got to go further back. Now, will we read Locke and Montesquieu and Tocqueville? Actually, we will, especially that Tocqueville, because there where you get the kind of third-party perspective on the American experience. Turns out he's French, and yeah, he's Catholic, but I'm not pulling his pedigree. I'm telling you, he's a good observer. He sees how society is changing. He notes these largely agricultural communities, but we're on the cusp, right? 1830s. That's when we're starting to talk about how do we industrialize? How do we build up? This is when the universities like Yale are saying, well, maybe we need to be a little less liberal arts focused. Maybe some of that A&M business, agriculture and mechanical, right? How many A&Ms we've got in our university systems cross country. Yeah. That's an advent of 19th century focus on, we got to get industry right. We got to feed in mass, right? As we move away from the farms. So I think while we'll read Locke, Montaigne, Tocqueville, and others, we absolutely have to be reading Jacques Barzun, right? We got to read Oakeshott. We got to be reading our poets. And I'm talking about some of them who are living. I don't know if you've had Dana Gioia on deck, but
That'd be cool.
I love that guy, in part because here's a guy who worked in industry. I mean, he worked in General Mills as an executive and, kind of ran the ads and whatever, product management. And then halfway through his career, right? He's 20 years in or something. He's got this sort of closet habit of writing poetry and criticism, And he comes out and says, I think we could do better. I think I'm going to do better. I'm going to make a contribution to letters, right? To the life of letters. I mentioned Gioia because he's very much an urbanite, grew up in the city in LA, grew up to an immigrant family, mixture of Italian and Mexican, and has real world knowledge of what it takes when you go into big corporate. And at the same time, most of his writing is focused on those lyrics that talk about the lives we live in these modern places, but with an attachment to really a desire to find that which is most meaningful. So I bring Gioia in because I'm saying I think this tradition is still very much alive and well. Gioia went on to run the National Endowment for the Arts back in the early 2000s, started Poetry Out Loud, started the sort of a reading initiative to get kids back into books, was just really about the humanities, right? He was just really advocating for the arts and the humanities. And some of that stuff has stuck. So I look at a guy like that who knows real world industry and then turns his talents to building things that will cultivate our communities. And I think that's the answer, not just reading the classics on their own. I mean, we read them on their own and understand them as of their moment, addressing their time, but figure out, well, how does that translate, if you will, to where we are today?
So I hear a missionary mentality there, which is to live within the machine, using my pal King's Norse idea that you live within the machine, but you salt it, you give it life by retaining what I would call the artistic aspect of human life, which used to just be called religion, which is ironic. Oh, he's so artistic. Oh, you mean he's soulful? Oh, you mean I get it. He's of God. Yeah, that's right.
He's religious. Yeah, that's right.
He's religious. So I get that. But I just worry. So you're a Catholic guy, right? You converted.
I did about 12 years ago now.
And so there's something that attracts you to the, let's call it Roman Catholic narrative, which, by the way, is very attractive. There were times in my life when I was really drawn toward Francis of Assisi. And I get it. And how would you describe the relationship between Catholicism and what classical educators in America are trying to do today, whether they're Catholic or not? Are they twins? Are they connected?
No, I think there's a relationship, no question. There's a familial resemblance by all means. Maybe because we're here in America and really focused on the U.S. For classical commons and this renewal that we're talking about, it is a nice parallel because Catholic education, Catholic parochial education, was always a bit of an outsider. In the origin of the country, obviously in the colonies themselves, only Maryland really is founded with some genuine freedom and encouragement, for that matter, of Catholicism. For the most part, Catholicism is an outsider, if not a reject, right? To what is a largely Protestant nation in its founding, and throughout the 19th century, right, in the early Republic. Again, that Catholic thing is over here on the margins. Its European import, its primary kind of gold standard was the Jesuit model, right, that had been propagated. Or if we wanted to go back and even look at the Franciscans, I have to do this as a nod to my colleagues who are doing great work down at Flagler, exploring La Florida and La California, where the Franciscans dropped in, working with indigenous peoples, using the classical model that they had inherited largely from Erasmus, right? Yeah. Erasmus, and had educated in the sense of educating from the Western Latin tradition the indigenous peoples who became really incredible interlocutors, amazingly theologically astute, right? Having come out of a rather spirit animistic tradition in many cases.
Yeah.
But sorry, just a quick note. My colleague up at Brown University just wrote and published, it's not out yet, Aztec Latin, a must read.
Really?
Because what you're going to find is that first cadre of Aztec leadership converted to Christian faith, Catholic faith, yes, under the Spanish, and then became some of the most eloquent and conversant members of the tradition, who then argued, even before Bartolome de las Casas, that they had rights. Their human dignity was secured by their Christian Catholic faith, and they made that argument to the crown, the Spanish crown, and won the day. Anyhow, Aztec Latin, check it out.
Oh.
So I think if we come to the American experience of, again, the Anglophonic world, we're dealing with Catholic faith and Catholic education as a marginal affair that still held a kind of gold standard that they had inherited through the Ratio Studiorum, right, through the Jesuits. They did some really great work. Many have commented even today. We have, 7 of our 9 justices, 6 or 7 of them were Catholically educated.
Yeah.
There's something profoundly, genetically related in terms of classical ed and what was gold standard Catholic education a century ago, because it did recognize a tradition. It recognized an integration of humanities, of arts and sciences, of theology, that we have largely lost, certainly in the public district schools, the typical schools, but for the most part, even in our private schools that don't know where to put religion quite, as we were talking about, as you said a moment ago, right? Soulful, religious, like, what do you do with that? So I think that the classical schools in a private setting where they're openly religious are recovering that integrated approach. It's still on the margins. John, let's be clear. Maybe there's 1,500 of these schools nationwide. If you add all of them up, that's a pittance from the tens of thousands, right? And the millions of kids being served typically by public schools.
Yeah, and my angles, you guys are to me. Well, I have some more quasi-critical questions to ask.
Sure, go ahead.
It's really good though. This is nice conversation. For me, I don't imagine you, Robert, are imagining that this becomes the standard for education in what we call the United States of America. Or do you guys, you and the Kearns and Searcy and all these cats, is this an idea that this is going to be the way we educate people as a country? Do you have a nationalistic approach that way?
Nationalistic. I'll be careful with that adjective, but you mean like a national aspiration, you mean?
Yeah, but I mean a nationalistic in the sense that it's a demand of a good nation to have a proper education, and this is the one.
Yeah. I suppose I'm susceptible to that, John. I'll be honest, right? I'm susceptible and maybe a little grandiose at times. My wife would attest to that for sure. Bit of a dreamer, right? But as I said moments ago, I think anytime you find a great teacher drawing on the tradition, that individual, he or she is working from this classical liberal form, because its rootstock is excellence.
Yeah.
Its primary characteristic is virtue, both intellectual and moral, right?
Yeah.
Its fundamental aim is human flourishing, the fulfillment of the individual and the fulfillment of the society. So you can't miss the fact that when we classically educate, when we take on this tradition, we're very much engaged with the civic center. We know that the society that we've inherited is shaping us. And unless we are conscientiously, intentionally trying to shape it towards higher and better aims, it is going to naturally devolve. Like, we shouldn't be surprised, right? When the next base thing comes out, the next, sort of meme or the next viral vice, is out there. Of course, human nature being human nature, That stuff is titillating. That stuff is interesting. It's exciting. Unless we are actively promoting goodness,
So
unless we're actively making things that are beautiful, right? I think things will develop. So I have a tendency, to your question, to want to see this taken on more widely. At the same time, I want to see it done well in local communities. That's my fixation, is can we help out those local communities to do this well and be the leaven, be the little mustard seed, right? That we think it can be.
I think it's a beautiful aspiration. Okay, but here's a hard one. Well, I'll make a comment / question.
Sure.
And if you don't mind, just using what I know about education and history. Your vocab is interesting. It's rooted in goodness and virtue, and it definitely goes back to Aristotle.
Sure.
And the golden age of Athens and all that, and there's nothing wrong with that. I don't have a problem with that. I actually I used it in my classrooms and in the school we started. I get it. That's not really a problem. But here's an argument. Well, it'll come from, let's call it the East.
Okay.
There's really no such thing as goodness. There's a such thing as Christ. And then the imitators of goodness will eventually imitate Christ, or they won't have goodness. And this is my criticism of the Enlightenment, which is they tried to do, I'm not saying it's what you're doing, I'm not saying that, but they tried to use the vocabulary of the deist. And when I'm around classical educators, I notice they like the language of the deists because it's an all-comer language. It's like, okay, see, you can come too to our school, and you can come too, and you can come too. And what the monks say, and the reason why, if you look at what's Orthodox classical, what's Orthodox education look like? You go, oh, that's a monastery. Oh no, but like for people who aren't in the monastery, they're like, that's the farm. There's no like high school. That's not what happens. You get educated in the family, a type of monastery, or you get educated in the monastery, a monastery. Yeah. There isn't this thing in the middle. And what I found is classical educators are really good at doing the Enlightenment over again, or at doing the Renaissance again. And I'm like, I don't want to go back to that. I think Christianity needs a Renaissance called Orthodoxy. You see what I'm trying to say is, I'm nervous that you're fishing in the same stream and you're just going to have the same sick fish in another 400 years. Like, I don't really get it myself. Like, I don't really get it.
No, I appreciate this. This is actually really good stuff because, listen, man, as much as I enjoy my Ben Franklin, and
hang with Ben Franklin
and my Jefferson, and obviously I'm thankful for that declaration and his contributions, UVA, whatever. But man, I'm not reading that Bible, right? His Bible.
Well, he cut it all up.
Of course he did. So
cut it up.
So that's a great metaphor for what the Enlightenment has done to the religious soul of our society. It's cut it out and ripped it out. And again, Jefferson's Bible is just a great metaphor because the entire 19th century, as I'm reading through it, is a theological Jefferson's Bible, right? We're going to get more realistic about this. We're going to use this critical historical method. We're going to get right down to the real Jesus, see what he was really doing.
Yes.
Here we are in the wake of the resurrection, and I just can't help but think. I was reading my Romano Guardini, The Lord, is a 1950s or so publication. Father Guardini has just some great takes on the whole life of the Lord. But now I'm reading the resurrection, and I'm just struck by the fact that your typical critical, we know better, and we can explain away this resurrection, this sort of crazy, inexplicable historical phenomena. We can explain away. I mean, it's right there in the text themselves. So the Jews, or, the leadership says, we're going to pay you soldiers so you can keep quiet and tell everybody that somebody stole the body, right? Now, this is, by the way, that same group that was terrified, hanging out, no doubt, in that upper room, even, just hanging out because they were awestruck by the fact that their teacher had just been utterly destroyed, right?
Yeah.
There's nothing in them that's going to be myth making. They're not going to get together and come up with a little, that just doesn't hold. It doesn't cohere, right? So anyhow, sorry, without going off too far on that score, I think you're onto something that we dare not just recap the Enlightenment. Now, if you want to read some Enlightenment authors, because you need to understand where we've come from. You need to understand some of the water under the bridge. That's helpful to get your bearings, but you better go all the way back into the tradition. You better study the pagans. You better understand what happened when that resurrected one came forth and when he sent those apostles out and told the entire world, the known world, it's a new game, right? Caesar's son of God? Wait a minute. Actually, Jesus Christos, right?
Yeah.
It's radical. So I'm just telling.
Classical education just the body that is necessary to teach about Christ? In other words, is classical education just Christian education? It's a weird thing that happens because I've gone.
I don't think it is. I don't think it is because I've got.
I know. That's a good answer. I've gone to these conferences and I'm like, this is really interesting here because a lot of these people would call themselves not atheists, but they would call themselves scientific practitioners or something, and they want the classical education. So how do you sort that?
Yeah. So by the way, you got me on my tirade there because I'm sort of laying my cards on the table. I am absolutely aware that I'm committed first and foremost to being a disciple of Christ. So that's a personal commitment. The work that I'm doing in this classical commons and with classical schools allows me to see a variety of models, both public and private, religious and, if I may, secular, and to support them, right, in some basic elements that they have to succeed, namely to find the right people, and then to train and equip those people for the classroom and to create the kind of culture in these schools. But to your question, is every classical school necessarily Christian? It is not. In fact, I've got some colleagues now. I'm just really delighted to see some of my colleagues, Jewish colleagues, Tikva in particular, and a school down in Austin called Hadar Jewish Academy, picking up from their tradition, right? And it's a deeply religious tradition, as you know, picking up the classical approach to liberal arts education and reintegrating it or sort of revitalizing yeshiva and or Jewish academy work. And
through
that's
the
not
classical strain.
What's that?
Interesting. Through the classical strain. Is it Aristotelian?
How can we miss that, right? I mean, this stream, if we go back to the medieval, because you and I love to go back to the medieval, at least as some of the precedent setting. I mean, at least the precedent setting, right? Educationally, because that's where the university is born. That's where these cathedral schools, right, are born.
Yeah.
And it's there that we see, again, Thomas Aquinas and Maimonides and Averroes. We don't have mathematics or modern science if we don't have that intersection, right? There's a richness and a true diversity, right? A true cultural exchange that takes place in this classical tradition that draws heavily from outside of what you might think of as the narrowly Christian perspective. Now, mind you, again, I can make arguments, as I know you can, for the Logos, right? For the nature of where the truth is embodied and fulfilled and completed, right? And we can go straight to biblical text to sort of proof text that. But I'm interested on this ground, kind of in this secular age, if you will, of bringing as many to the table as possible with a full recognition that religion is a fundamental, if not an essential, the essential component of our humanity. So if you diss that, right? If you marginalize that, if you tell us that, in fact, no, you can't do that here, right? You can't even think about those things because that's religion, and you're violating the church-state divide. Wait a minute, like where is that coming from? How are you reading that First Amendment? I think we got to get a little more specific about what we mean when we say education or schooling, and how we approach the relatedness of our subjects. And religion should not be an ugly stepchild, right, in our understanding of educating the whole person. It should be a central feature.
Okay, so here's what gets really interesting. And we got a little bit more time.
Oh, yeah, I'm running long here. You get me pontificating, John. That's on me. That's on me.
No. What are you talking about? I'm the great pontificator. That's why people turn on. That's why people are like, I'm out of here. But no, we're doing good. I could actually, ironically, we run this organization. By the way, for people who are listening to this podcast is an attempt, as always, to do one thing, and it's to create a network and an awareness of our work, which is essentially like Peace Corps. We send people for 2 years at a time to go and live in tough neighborhoods and do very cool things that start local projects. And so we use the Orthodox sort of ascetic concept in order to really spread this thing called the supra, which is simply relational life. And then we demand that our guys go and do this thing, which is learn local language, learn local cultures, and long before they start a project. And so we're trying to invert the education process and say that we actually don't have anything to offer you. You're teaching us so that we might assist you and facilitate your work. So that's what this podcast is for people who came to listen to Robert. But so my hope is just constantly extend that conversation. You can find all the links. But with that in mind, I was wanting to know, one of the things we're trying to do is actually challenge the ideas that people bring onto the show. And so just to extend that one little bit further, I do think that the Department of Education, whether it be federal or not, the Department of Education in Illinois, the Department of the Board of Education in, I don't know, some little town somewhere, they are disseminators of culture.
Yep.
There's no such thing as called like a neutral education. There has to be a choice about what we're offering to young people when they're not in the arms of their parents. And so, I'm way past the idea that there's some neutral. It's just the absurd concept. But
there's no naked public square, to borrow a phrase from Newhouse.
What an absurd! Talk about a great marketing device. Whoever did that, well done. And also, thanks for screwing up life. But so we can agree on that, you and me. But wait, so then that means that the Department of Education, which exists, my daughter actually works in it. It is a disseminator of something, of a core something, of a philosophical, let's call it a reality, in the sense that people believe it as a group in the Department of Education in Washington, D.C. and or these other places. And are you saying that there is a core that can serve humanity called classical education? Are you saying that, one? And two is, what's the core? For me, it feels like Aristotle. I don't know. Yeah, just say the core is, and can it work as a template for like one of these departments called American Department of Education? Can it work?
I've been throwing out a lot of propositions, a lot of sort of assertions that this is the way it ought to be, and maybe I'm a little.
I think so. You're not heavy-handed about it.
But I want to be clear. I know there's plenty that I don't know, but what I've come to after probably 25 years or so in education is your point. There is an implicit valence. There's an implicit sentiment that is being communicated, right? Sort of an inclination towards something that's laid out before us as the good. Call it good or not. That's what education is pointing towards.
Mm-hmm.
And I think at this stage, call it postmodern, call it post-Christian, call it whatever you want. Here we are in this now year 2025. We are in this society, American society, struggling desperately to find our way, to get our footing, to get foundation. Young people are struggling with depression.
Yeah.
Young people are struggling with this sort of very angsty, like, where am I going to, and of course they just continue to doom scroll in hopes that next little hit of dopamine is going to somehow pull them out. And it just, as Jonathan Haidt and others have shown, Gene Twenge and others, it just goes, it's just down, 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 right? There's just not what they're looking for. And so our educational system does need something of this classical liberal rootedness that just empirically has 2,500 years plus to draw upon. Let's go back to Homer, 800 BC, right? So anyhow, 3,000 years roughly. And don't forget the pre-Socratics, because as much as I love Plato, well, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, that little trifecta, actually the pre-Socratics have a lot to offer us. And the poets that, of course, Plato's always wrangling with are in many ways, to cite Wordsworth, as I recall, they're the legislators of mankind, but not in the way you think, not in the way we think, right?
Yeah.
They're actually influencing us by the stories they tell, right? By the meaning that they infuse. And because we've become so post-narrative or sort of, like narrative free-for-all, we're desperate to find how it fits together, how it coheres. And I think that, let's say, 3,000-year tradition gives us at least a little bit of material to begin with. If we could understand it better, study it carefully, and read it for the story that it is, the grand story, I think we'd pull a lot out of it that would give us some guidance for our current malaise, our modern malaise. And I think that that's classical liberal education, which, yes, is deeply infused with religion. Again, both Christianity, Islam, and Judaism all have contributions that they've made, right? As we were talking about a moment ago. So fundamentally, it can be ecumenical. And for you and I, as fellow Christians, we can talk about how it leads towards an apprehension, or perhaps the preparation for, laying hold of something more and total in the Logos made flesh. But even before we do that, there's work to be done just to produce, as E.D. Heers likes to say, cultural literacy, so that we can have a conversation about the ideas that seem to be perennial. They've been with us as far back as we have record, and they just keep coming forward. How are we going to get at justice? How are we going to be merciful? How are we going to treat our fellow man? What kind of regime, what kind of politic are we going to embrace?
Yeah.
What is a good life? And so forth and so on, right? Like, those are questions that we can find not final answers to, but hints and allusions and obviously models and exemplars. That's in there. That's why we study that tradition. That's why we go over it carefully and read it in a sustained, intentional way. It's got good stuff in it.
I think what you guys are doing at Classical Commons, maybe we can finish. I'll let you finish with an idea, whatever you want to say. But I want to say this. It's sort of how the show, we go back and forth. But at Classical Commons, I think what you're doing is really something important, which is recognizing the collapse of this experiment called modernity, and in particular called utilitarian relativism or something like that. And you're saying that's really not going to work. The kids are being punished literally by whatever we've adopted, or just whatever has been the default adoption. People don't even know. I don't think, well, I worked in many public schools. I don't think even public educators know what the heck they're supposed to, what's the point of this? It's just get a job for this kid, basically. Yeah. And I think what Classical Commons is doing is essential and important. I would just say this, that there is a concept, and this is a classical idea. It really comes from both the Christian East and Christian West, that religion isn't really about a God. It's about that which binds people together. And so from the idea of the ligament, there's the notion that, okay, Robert, you and I agree on A, B, and C. So I use sports on this case. I'm a Met fan, big time. And so I don't know. I know there's Met fans out there. And when I get together with Met fans at a bar or just a restaurant or my house, we're bound by that. And there could be 20 people in there that I totally don't even agree with about God, about Christ. It doesn't matter, because my religion in this case is the Mets. And so there's some binding that you're describing in classical education that I think I understand. What I would argue, and I'll leave it with you, and you can take it on or not. You say whatever you want. But what I would argue is the binding is the narrative that you just described, going all the way back to pre-Socratics through Homer and all these cats. But also, I think it's a religion unto itself that was actually created by the through the Renaissance, the Reformation, and then into the Enlightenment. It's its own thing. And I'll adhere to it because I think it's better than the public thing we have going. I'm not against it. I would send my kids to your schools. I would. I don't think they're going to get the thing that I have at home, though, called Orthodoxy. I'm fine with that because I don't expect that as an Orthodox. I don't expect you to have my school. I don't even want to go to an Orthodox high school. I don't even think they know what it is. I don't think any of us Orthodox know what the hell that is. I think it's actually probably a classical school. Well, it's the farm. So what do you think about it's the same conversation we've been having, but tell me what you think about that, and then also tell me whatever you want people to know.
It's good. I just don't think schools are supposed to be the end all be all. So I like the idea,
nice.
Right?
Fair.
I like the idea, which you're touching on, is that if anybody, in our audience, in our circle of classical educators thinks if you just get this done, right? Kids dropped off at the school and you give them a great experience, a great encounter with Socrates and
We fixed
Dante,
it.
right? We fixed it. Forget about it. That is not true. Because, of course, the acid test is when they graduate, and when they get out into the world, and when they start their own families, and when they contribute to their local communities.
Mm-hmm.
That's where we find out if this education, right?
Yeah.
And again, it's not just what's happening in the school. It's why, as you and I spoke earlier, it's so critical that we get parents, not just to buy in, not just to sort of begrudgingly accept, well, it's a little weird. It's a little different than what I had, but it's better than. No, man, it's got to be a full embrace, right?
Mm-hmm.
But anyhow, to your question, I don't want to see these schools become an end in and of themselves. Again, they're, if I can use a fancy Greek Greek etymologically Greek term, it's propedeutic, right? It's that which goes before. It's the training that equips and prepares these young people to live well, right? To pursue that notion that Aristotle speaks of, human flourishing, but to do so in a way that has a vision like that of Dante, right? That's going to require real purgation, right? And a real recognition.
That's right.
That you could totally end up in hell. And that's the life you're living. And then it works through, again, so many of the great narratives. So I guess to close, I simply want to say these classical schools are a part of the kind of renewal that our society needs because we are desperate to find the meaning that we were made for. And if they do their part well, they will equip young people and their families to know that there are things more important than education and schooling, right? They'll have a sense of the sort of priorities that they should be able to mark out in their lives. And they will be able to live well in accordance with priorities that put the first things first, right? Yeah. And order their lives accordingly. So at Classical Commons, I just want to say to your audience, if you're interested, if you want to check this out, we are really desperate, John, as you know, to find more people to get involved. And I'd love your tagline, creation begins with sacrifice. We're looking for some people who are not only willing to make some sacrifices, but to be creative, to energize and vitalize these local classical schools. We want to see people getting involved left, right, all over the place. And I'm hoping that this conversation at least inspires a few to come check us out.
Right on. Well, you came with some good recs from a friend of mine where we threw the super out in Maryland, Kent. So good. So we'll keep talking.
Yeah.
Look, the sun went down and I forgot to light my house properly. And so now my podcast is going dark. Look, I'm dying right in front of you. Right. This is a good lesson that you can have lots of words and still be dead inside. Look, I'm dying. Who loves you, man? So we'll put all the links. Yeah. And in fact, no, I have the links. I think you sent me some already. Yeah. But we'll put the links and people can connect with you because I'm actually, though I asked a lot of questions that could be seen as negative, I think this is one of the best alternatives to what we have going right now. But I want to honor all those public school teachers, man, that I
for sure.
Like those guys were badass. And
in fact, just know, John, if they're out there and they're listening to this thing, just come take a look at these classical schools. They need you. If you've got 10 years in the tank, you've been doing the work, you love the subjects, we might actually need to recruit you.
Right on. All right, Robert Jackson, everybody. Thanks, man. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir.
Guys. Christe ogsta me kretit, Sviglitlitza, Dam trungum vebe das aplas vebe shinata, Trovre bimimnit chebedli. Christe ogsta, that is the Georgian. Christ is risen. Christ is risen from the dead. Guys, it's Holy Week, or it's Bright Week right now. When you see this, maybe less bright. It might just be hot summer week. Guys, the commercial you saw earlier in this, you should go back and watch it and then do it. I need people to continue to support First Things. Forget me, I don't need it. Well, that's helpful too. But guys, this is what we do in life, is we sit together, know each other, learn each other's way of life, and then we assist each other. And then God says, well done, good and faithful servant. And if you're not religious and listening to this just makes my whole day, more than anything. In fact, if you're not, quote, religious, whatever that means, it's stupid. If you believe that Christ is not risen from the dead and you're watching this, I have 2 free tickets to a Supra for you. Write me. You have to find the email though. No. It's on our website. If you find my email and write, hey John, I don't buy that at all, but I sure would like to come to your restaurant and eat Georgian food. I got 2 free tickets. That's a $200 value. Bam, handing that out. If you're still listening and you don't believe, that's better. Well, it's not better. It might be dangerous for you and for me. By the way, when I believe, it makes it worse because now I got to actually do the thing. I'm going to hell. Also, the Art of Tamada is coming. It's coming. In Greenville, it's going to be a free-for-all of many tables and live music and lots of fun and some cool speakers. And in Florida, it'll be on the beach, exclusive. Only 25 tickets. I hate being exclusive, but how else am I supposed to raise money? We have 500 people on the beach? Wait, Burning Man. We could call it, I know what we could call it, Toasting Man. Get it? It's toasting, not burning. Toasting is delicious. Burning seems like bad. Burning seems bad. Don't go to Burning Man. Bad. Toasting Man, good. I'd like to end by saying, support First Things Foundation. Do it now. And Andrew, if you cut any of this, I'll kill you. Whoa, I just threatened to kill the producer of my podcast. You have it on tape. I take it all back. Is it too late? I've just been targeted saying violent words. Andrew, I would never kill you. Gagi Marjos. It's Bright Week. Maybe in Hot Week I'd kill you. Gagi Marjos.